Blake Iverson hated weddings. Yet here he was, dressed in a tailored navy suit that cost more than some people's monthly salary, leaning against the open bar at the Harbor View Hotel ballroom, watching his former assistant Carlos Martinez beam with joy next to his new wife. It wasn't that Blake didn't appreciate love, it was that these events reminded him how little of it existed in his own life. "Champagne, sir?" the bartender asked. "Scotch, neat," Blake replied, loosening his tie slightly. At 35, he'd built Iverson Maritime from a small shipping business into a global empire with a fleet of cargo vessels that stretched across every major port in the world. Wealth, power, respect, he had it all. What he didn't have was someone to share it with. That's when he saw her. She was laughing, head thrown back, honey blonde hair cascading down her bare shoulders as she helped the bride adjust her train. The maid of honor. Even from across the room, her joy seemed authentic, not the practiced social smiles he'd grown accustomed to seeing at charity galas and business functions. "Who is that?" Blake asked Carlos when the groom approached the bar minutes later. "Lila Kennedy," Carlos replied with a knowing grin. "Julia's best friend since college. She's a marine biologist, specializes in coral reef restoration. Just finished her PhD. Blake nodded, trying to appear only casually interested. "Smart woman." "The smartest," Carlos agreed, clapping a hand on Blake's shoulder. "Thanks for coming, boss." "I know these things aren't really your scene." "Former boss," Blake corrected. Carlos had left Iverson Maritime 2 years ago to pursue his dream of launching an eco-friendly fishing charter business. It was small but growing steadily, and I wouldn't have missed it. Carlos's expression softened. "It meant a lot to Julia and me. Not many CEOs would fly across the country for a middle manager's wedding." Blake shrugged off the compliment. He'd always treated his employees with respect, but Carlos had been different, hardworking, honest, loyal. Qualities Blake valued more than most. "Go enjoy your bride," Blake said, nodding toward Julia, who was waving Carlos back to the dance floor. "I'm fine right here." But he wasn't fine. Not after Lila Kennedy stepped up to the microphone to deliver her maid of honor speech. Her voice was confident yet gentle as she spoke about friendship, courage, and finding love when you least expect it. Blake found himself leaning forward, captivated not just by her words but by the warmth behind them. When the formal dances began, Blake remained at the bar, nursing his second scotch. He wasn't one for dancing, never had been. His mother had tried to teach him once before the cancer took her. After that, his father had been too consumed by the failing family shipping business to care about such frivolities. "You look like you're plotting an escape route." Blake turned to find Lila Kennedy standing beside him, a glass of wine in her hand, amusement dancing in her eyes that were the color of the Mediterranean on a clear day. "That obvious?" he asked. Only to a fellow introvert who's done her social duty and is now contemplating a stealth exit. She extended her hand. "I'm Lila, maid of honor and professional wedding survivalist." "Blake," he replied, taking her hand. It was soft but strong, the hand of someone who worked with it. "Friend of the groom." "Ah," she nodded. "One of Carlos's fishing buddies." Blake hesitated. He could correct her, tell her exactly who he was, but something stopped him. For once, someone was talking to him without knowing about his wealth or status. It felt refreshing. "Something like that," he said instead. "You mentioned you're an introvert, yet you just gave a speech in front of 200 people. Lila laughed, the sound warming something inside him that had been cold for too long. "That's different. I believe in Julia and Carlos. It's easy to speak from the heart when you mean every word." "And do you always speak from the heart, Lila Kennedy?" "I try to," she said, meeting his gaze directly. "Life's too short for anything else." Blake felt a tug in his chest, a warning. This woman was dangerous, not because she might want something from him, but because she clearly didn't. And that made her infinitely more intriguing. They talked for over an hour, tucked away in a corner of the ballroom while the party swirled around them. Lila told him about her work with coral reefs, her passion for ocean conservation, and her small apartment in Key Largo that overlooked the water. Blake shared stories of places he'd seen during his travels, carefully editing out details that might reveal his position. "You've been to the Maldives?" Lila's eyes lit up. "I've been trying to get a research permit there for years." "It's breathtaking," Blake said, remembering the private island he'd considered purchasing last year. "The water is so clear you can see straight to the bottom from the surface." "That's what I've heard," she sighed. "Maybe someday." When the DJ announced the last dance of the night, Blake surprised himself by standing and offering his hand. "Would you like to dance?" Lila raised an eyebrow. "I thought you didn't dance." "I said I wasn't good at it," he corrected. "Not that I wouldn't try for the right partner." Her smile, then, was worth every awkward step that followed. Blake wasn't graceful, but with Lila guiding him subtly, they managed not to collide with any other couples. As the song ended, he found himself reluctant to let her go. "I'm in town for a few more days," he said, the words coming out before he could overthink them. "Would you like to have dinner tomorrow night?" Lila stepped back slightly, studying his face. "I'd like that," she said finally, "but I should warn you I'm not looking for complications. My work takes me all over, and I'm not great at balancing relationships with my research. Just dinner," Blake promised, though he already knew he wanted more. "I'd like to hear more about your choral projects." They exchanged numbers, and Blake watched as Lila rejoined the bridal party for final photos. Carlos caught his eye from across the room and gave him a thumbs up, making Blake chuckle. His former assistant had always been perceptive. Back in his hotel suite, Blake loosened his tie and poured himself a mineral water from the minibar. He walked to the window, gazing out at the moonlight reflecting off the ocean. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something he'd nearly forgotten possibility. But as he placed his phone on the nightstand, doubt crept in. He hadn't been entirely honest with Lila. While he hadn't lied about who he was, he'd allowed her to believe he was just another wedding guest, not the billionaire CEO whose name appeared regularly in Fortune and Forbes. Would it matter to her? Carlos had said she was dedicated to her research. Blake had met enough environmentalists to know that many viewed his industry with suspicion. Global shipping wasn't exactly known for its small carbon footprint, despite the millions he'd invested in developing more sustainable technologies. Blake decided he would tell her tomorrow, over dinner, before anything between them had a chance to grow. Lila arrived at the beachside restaurant 15 minutes early, giving herself time to calm her nerves. She hadn't planned on meeting anyone at Julia's wedding, least of all someone like Blake. There was something about him, a quiet intensity, an attentiveness when she spoke that had caught her off guard. She smoothed down the simple blue sundress she'd chosen, grateful for the gentle evening breeze off the ocean. When she spotted Blake walking toward her, her pulse quickened. He looked different in casual clothes, more approachable, but somehow still commanding in linen pants and a crisp white button-down with the sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned forearms. "You look beautiful," he said when he reached her, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "Thank you," she replied, trying not to show how his gaze affected her. "You clean up pretty well yourself, considering you're not at a wedding anymore." The hostess led them to a secluded table on the deck overlooking the beach. As they settled in, Lila noticed Blake seemed slightly tense despite his easy smile. "Is everything okay?" she asked after they'd ordered drinks. Blake hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but there's something I need to tell you." Lila felt her stomach tighten. Was he married? In a relationship? She'd been so careful to check for a ring yesterday, but that didn't mean I wasn't entirely forthcoming about who I am, he said, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. "I'm not just a friend of Carlos, he used to work for me. I'm the CEO of Iverson Maritime." Lila blinked, processing this information. "Iverson Maritime, the shipping company?" "Yes," Blake confirmed, watching her reaction carefully. "Oh," she said, then frowned slightly. "Wait, are you Blake Iverson? As in the Blake Iverson?" He nodded, a wary expression crossing his face. "Is that a problem?" Lila took a sip of her water, considering. I guess I'm just confused why you didn't mention it yesterday. Honestly, Blake leaned forward. It was nice talking to someone who wasn't aware of my net worth within the first 5 minutes of conversation. People tend to act differently when they know. Lila could understand that, but still felt a prickle of discomfort. So you let me ramble on about needing grant money for my research when you probably spend that much on coffee each month. Blake winced. That's not fair. I was interested in your work, genuinely. I'm sorry, Lila sighed, realizing she was overreacting. You're right, it's just surprising. Their drinks arrived, creating a momentary pause in the conversation. Lila used the interruption to gather her thoughts. For what it's worth, Blake said after the server departed, I was planning to tell you tonight all along. I didn't want to start anything based on a misunderstanding. Start anything? Lila repeated, arching an eyebrow. Blake's lips curved into a smile that sent warmth cascading through her. I enjoyed talking with you last night, more than I've enjoyed talking with anyone in a long time. I'd like to see where this could go, if you're interested. Lila considered him carefully. There was something compelling about Blake Iverson, and it wasn't his wealth or position. It was the way he listened, the thoughtfulness behind his words, the respect he'd shown her work. I'm leaving for a research expedition in 3 weeks, she said finally. I'll be gone for 6 months, living on a boat in the South Pacific with a team of scientists, not exactly conducive to dating. I have 12 cargo ships currently crossing the Pacific, Blake countered, and a private jet that can land anywhere with a decent runway. Lila laughed despite herself. Most guys would have given up at the mention of 6 months at sea. I'm not most guys, he replied simply. And I think we both know that. The dinner that followed was the most engaging Lila had experienced in years. Blake was knowledgeable about marine conservation efforts, asking thoughtful questions about her research while sharing insights from his industry's perspective. When she challenged some of his company's practices, he didn't become defensive but listened carefully, acknowledging areas where improvement was needed. You know, Iverson Maritime could fund an entire fleet of research vessels for what you spend on a single cargo ship, Lila pointed out over dessert. We do have a foundation that supports marine research, Blake replied. But you're right, we could be doing more. Maybe you could advise us on where to direct additional resources. Lila tilted her head, studying him. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Iverson? Would you take it if I were? Not a chance, she said with a grin. I prefer being in the water to sitting in boardrooms. Blake laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Fair enough. But the offer to consult stands, no strings attached. After dinner, they walked barefoot along the beach, the moon casting a silver path across the water. Lila felt an ease with Blake that defied explanation, given how little time they'd known each other. What made you go into shipping? She asked as they strolled. Blake was quiet for a moment. Family business initially. My father had a small fleet, just 3 ships when I was growing up. He worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep the company afloat after my mother died. I'm sorry about your mother, Lila said softly. It was a long time ago, Blake replied, though his expression suggested the loss still affected him. When Dad died 10 years ago, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. I had just finished business school and was determined not to let his life's work disappear. So you turned it around. I did more than that, Blake acknowledged without arrogance. I saw opportunities others didn't: emerging markets, efficiency improvements, technological innovations. Within 5 years, we'd grown tenfold. 5 years after that, we went public, he paused. But success came with a price. Isolation, Lila guessed, remembering his comment about people treating him differently. Blake nodded, looking out at the ocean. It's hard to know who to trust when everyone wants something from you. Impulsively, Lila reached for his hand. I don't want anything from you, Blake. He turned to her, his expression intense. That's what makes you dangerous, Lila Kennedy. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of shared meals, long conversations, and stolen moments between Lila's preparation for her upcoming expedition. Blake had extended his stay in Key Largo, working remotely from his hotel suite while Lila finished her pre-expedition research at the Marine Laboratory where she was based. They fell into an easy rhythm, with Blake often bringing dinner to the lab when Lila worked late, sitting quietly with his laptop while she analyzed samples or reviewed data. Some evenings, they'd take his rented boat out to watch the sunset, talking about everything from childhood memories to future dreams. "Have you always wanted to be a marine biologist?" Blake asked one evening as they floated in a secluded cove, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. Lila nodded, trailing her fingers through the clear water. "Since I was 8 and saw my first coral reef on a family vacation to Hawaii, it was like discovering an alien world right here on Earth. I knew then that I wanted to protect it." "Your passion shows when you talk about your work," Blake observed. "It's inspiring." "What about you?" Lila asked. "If shipping hadn't been the family business, what would you have done?" Blake considered this. "Architecture, maybe." "I've always been fascinated by how structures work the combination of artistry and engineering." He gave her a rueful smile. "Though I might have been terrible at it." "Somehow I doubt that," Lila said. "You strike me as someone who succeeds at whatever he sets his mind to." "Not everything," Blake replied softly, his eyes meeting hers. "Some things can't be achieved through determination alone." The air between them changed, charged with an electricity that had been building since that first conversation at the wedding. Lila found herself moving closer to him, drawn by a force she couldn't name. When Blake kissed her, it felt inevitable, like the tide meeting the shore. His lips were gentle at first, questioning, then more insistent as she responded. Lila felt herself melting into him, her hands sliding up to frame his face. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you laughing at the wedding," Blake admitted when they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers. "Why did you wait so long?" Lila asked, breathless. "I wanted to be sure you were kissing me, not my bank account," he replied with a wry smile. Lila pulled back slightly to look at him. "Blake Iverson, I can assure you that your financial status has absolutely nothing to do with how much I wanted you to kiss me just now." His answering smile was worth every moment of uncertainty that had preceded it. As the date of Lila's departure approached, a tension crept into their time together, an awareness that whatever was growing between them would soon be tested by distance and time. "6 months is a long time," Lila said the night before she was set to leave, curled against Blake's side in his hotel suite. "I wouldn't blame you if you decided it's not worth the wait." Blake tightened his arm around her. "Do you really think so little of what we've found here?" Lila sighed. "No, but I'm being realistic. You're a billionaire with a global company to run. I'm a scientist about to disappear into the ocean for half a year. It's not exactly a conventional relationship." "When have either of us ever been conventional?" Blake countered. "Besides, I've already made arrangements to visit you halfway through your expedition." Lila sat up, surprised. "You have?" "I have business in Sydney in 3 months," he explained. "It's not so far from where your research vessel will be by then. I thought I might drop by." "Just drop by," Lila repeated, amused. "In the middle of the South Pacific." Blake shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant despite the intensity in his eyes. "I miss you already, and you haven't even left. I'm not willing to wait 6 months to see you again." "What if?" Lila hesitated, then pushed forward. "What if I'm not what you expected when you get there? What if this," she gestured between them, "was just the magic of a holiday romance?" Blake sat up, taking her face in his hands. "Lila Kennedy, you are the most real person I've ever met. What I feel for you isn't about location or circumstance. It's about who you are, your passion, your intelligence, your integrity. That won't change whether we're in Key Largo or Timbuktu." His words filled the hollow space in Lila's chest that had been expanding since she'd remembered the reality of her departure. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Not of leaving, but of leaving you." Blake kissed her then, pouring everything he couldn't yet say into the gesture. When he pulled back, his eyes were fierce with determination. "This isn't an ending. It's barely even a beginning." The first month of separation was harder than either of them had anticipated. Satellite phone calls were brief and often interrupted by poor connections. Emails were delayed by spotty internet access. Lila threw herself into her research, cataloging new coral species and documenting recovery patterns in previously damaged reefs. Blake expanded Iverson Maritime's sustainability initiatives, creating a new division focused on reducing the company's environmental impact. 2 months into Lila's expedition, a tropical storm damaged some of her team's equipment. Blake arranged for replacements to be delivered within 48 hours, a logistical miracle that earned him the gratitude of the entire research crew. Though Lila insisted in her next call that he shouldn't use his resources to solve her problems. "It's not about solving your problems," Blake argued over the crackling connection. "It's about supporting your work, which is important. To the planet or to you?" Lila challenged. "Both," he answered without hesitation. "Is that so wrong?" Lila sighed. "No, but I don't want to be the scientist who succeeds because her boyfriend throws money at obstacles." "Boyfriend," Blake repeated, and Lila could hear the smile in his voice. "Is that what I am?" "Well, what would you call it?" Lila asked, feeling her cheeks warm despite being alone in her tiny cabin. "I'd call it the best thing that's happened to me in years," Blake replied. "And I'd call myself the luckiest man alive." By the time Blake's visit approached, Lila found herself counting the days, then the hours. When his seaplane finally landed beside their research vessel, she could barely contain herself, pacing the deck until he climbed aboard. He looked different, more tanned, his hair slightly longer, but his smile when he saw her was exactly as she remembered. Lila didn't care about the amused glances from her colleagues as she threw herself into his arms. "You're really here," she murmured against his neck. "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," Blake replied, holding her tightly. The 5 days they had together were precious and fleeting. Blake joined the research dives, his natural athleticism making him a quick study despite his limited experience. Lila watched with pride as he took genuine interest in her colleagues' work, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights from a business perspective that sometimes provided unexpected solutions to funding challenges. On their last night together, sitting on the deck beneath a canopy of stars more brilliant than any city dweller ever sees, Blake took Lila's hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low and serious, "about what happens when your expedition ends." Lila tensed slightly. This was the conversation she'd been both anticipating and dreading. And I want more than stolen weeks and interrupted phone calls," Blake continued. "I want to wake up next to you. I want to support your research not just financially, but by being there, seeing the wonder in your eyes when you discover something new." "What are you saying exactly?" Lila asked, her heart pounding. Blake shifted to face her directly. "I'm saying I love you, Lila. I've never said those words to anyone before, but I'm saying them now because they're true. I love your mind, your heart, your dedication. I love how you challenge me to be better not just as a man, but as a global citizen." Lila felt tears gathering in her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "But that doesn't solve the logistics. My work can continue exactly as it is," Blake interrupted gently. "But what if Iverson Maritime established a permanent research foundation, with its own vessel, state-of-the-art equipment, and funding for a team of your choosing? Based wherever you felt the need was greatest." Lila stared at him, stunned. "You do that, in a heartbeat," Blake confirmed. "Not to control you or your research, but to amplify it, to help you make the difference I know you're capable of making." "And where would you be while I'm saving coral reefs?" Lila asked, her practical nature asserting itself despite her emotion. Blake smiled. "I've been working remotely for nearly 3 months now. My executive team has proven they can handle day-to-day operations without me constantly looking over their shoulders. I could base myself wherever you are for much of the year, traveling when necessary." "You've thought this through," Lila realized. "I've had little else to think about," Blake admitted. Being apart from you has made one thing abundantly clear: I don't want a life that doesn't include you. Lila looked up at the vast spread of stars, feeling simultaneously small and infinite. It won't be easy, she cautioned. The best things rarely are, Blake replied, drawing her closer. But I think we're worth the effort, don't you? Instead of answering with words, Lila kissed him, pouring all her hopes and fears and love into the connection between them. 1 year later, Lila stood on the deck of the newly christened research vessel, the Kennedy Explorer, watching as her team prepared for their first official expedition. The ship represented everything she and Blake had discussed that night beneath the stars: a floating laboratory equipped with cutting-edge technology, staffed by some of the brightest minds in marine conservation. "Nervous?" Blake asked, coming to stand beside her at the railing. "Excited," Lila corrected, leaning into his solid presence. "I still can't believe this is real sometimes." "Which part?" Blake asked, his arm settling around her waist. "The ship or us?" "Both," Lila admitted with a laugh. "When I met you at that wedding, I never imagined we'd end up here." Blake's expression softened as he looked at her. "I knew," he said simply. "Maybe not the details, but I knew you were going to change my life." Lila turned in his arms to face him fully. "For a hard-headed businessman, you can be surprisingly romantic." "Only with you," Blake assured her, dropping a kiss on her forehead. "And only because you make it easy to believe in possibilities I'd given up on long ago." As the Kennedy Explorer pulled away from the dock, setting course for remote reefs that had never been properly studied, Lila felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey ahead would have challenges: scientific, personal, logistical, but facing them with Blake by her side made even the most daunting obstacles seem manageable. They had built something rare and precious, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had proven itself capable of spanning oceans. Not a fairy tale with a billionaire prince, but something better: a real love story with all its complexities and compromises, its growth and discovery. And as the coastline receded behind them, giving way to the endless blue horizon, Lila knew with absolute certainty that the greatest adventure of her life had only just begun.